Alright guys, what's up? It's Jack and welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be talking about some Devil May Cry because over the last month or so, the lead voice actor who plays Virgil and who has played Virgil basically kind of hinted without hinting in terms of a game he recently finished and how the director of the game pretty much asked him to kind of do a younger version of Virgil. So a lot of fans out there are saying that it is either going to be a Devil May Cry 3 remaster, or some fans also speculate that it could be a Devil May Cry 1 remaster. So now for me, I kind of have my own theory, and in my mind it's kind of obvious. So let's get right into this because I literally thought about this at work yesterday, and then the answer just popped up in my head, and it was as clear as you could possibly make it. I mean, it just makes sense, but at the same time, my word is obviously not final. This is me just being a fanboy and kind of speculating, so let's get into it. So, all right, so I do believe that obviously that this game could very much be either a prequel. Scenario number one, it's either a prequel, or what the voice actor was discussing was possibly a flashback to the past, right? Okay, now both of these things obviously make sense to me, and the reason why is because in Devil May Cry, we find out that Nero is Virgil's son. So with that being said, there's a lot of questions that pop up, right? Like, who is Nero's mother? Who is this woman that Virgil could have fallen in love with, or maybe had a fling with, or whatnot? There's a lot of unanswered questions when it comes to that, right? So in my mind, I'm thinking it could be something that it could be a game that obviously took place before the events of Devil May Cry 3, or it could be something that could be answered or shown in a flashback in a Devil May Cry 6, for instance, right? So now Devil May Cry 3 was the third game, right? Devil May Cry 3 was the third game, which is why it's called Devil May Cry 3, but it is a prequel to Devil May Cry 1. So it is possible that Devil May Cry 6, being the sixth Devil May Cry game in the series, could actually itself be a prequel, or it could be a sequel to Devil May Cry 5 that happens to go a little bit more in depth in terms of what happened during this particular era. And I think that's very interesting because out of the two brothers, right, Dante and Virgil, well, Virgil we don't know nearly as much about like we do with Dante when you think about it. Really, he's a little bit more mysterious, and he's like a very much, despite the fact that they're identical twins, it's very much like these characters couldn't be that. I mean, they're sure they have their similarities or whatnot, but for the most part they are like night and day when you think about it, or should I say in this case red and blue. So I think that Devil May Cry's next step moving forward are probably going to center a little bit more around Virgil, because there's a lot more backstory that needs explaining, especially now since Nero is where he is in the series, to where he's better known. Now, obviously in Devil May Cry 4, when Nero was introduced, my mind, when I first played the game back in 2008, my mind was like, okay, this guy is somehow, he's got to be related to Dante somehow, and the reason being is because of the hair, right? So then obviously towards the end of the game, when he absorbed Yamato, which is Virgil's main weapon, the katana sword, it kind of was hinting to where it was maybe he was related to Virgil in some way, shape, or form, but at the same time we just didn't know any more details. But because of how of what Nero looked like, particularly with the hair, from a genetic standpoint, you're like, he's got to be related to these two brothers somehow. Again, we could be wrong, but he's got to be related. And lo and behold, in Devil May Cry 5, it was indeed revealed that Nero is Virgil's son, which is very, very interesting, because more interesting so than if he was Dante's son, right? Because obviously we've spent the most time with Dante in the series, right? And then obviously we spent some time with Virgil and Nero as well, but for the most part, when you look at Virgil's backstory and everything like that, there's a lot of mystery that goes behind it, right? Because obviously at the end of Devil May Cry 3, Virgil decided to stay behind in the demon world instead of getting out with Dante or whatnot, and fell over, purposely fell over the cliff at the end of mission 20. And obviously Devil May Cry 1 was in terms of the story was what happened after the events of Devil May Cry 3. So it is very possible that Devil May Cry 6 could indeed be a prequel, but at the same time, it could be a sequel that just focuses a lot on Virgil's backstory. So that's going to be very interesting because, and for me personally, I would love it because you would get a Devil May Cry 6 or a Devil May Cry game to where you could play obviously as both Dante and Virgil, and if it is a sequel, then obviously you could probably play as Nero as well. It's gonna be very interesting in terms of how they bring that about. All we know, as far as anything that's been mentioned so far from what I've read very recently, is that she is human. Virgil's girlfriend or Nero's mother is human, or actually, we don't fully know that, but it just would make sense that she's human. But with that being said, we don't know if she's alive or dead, to be honest. So she is she could very much possibly pop up in Devil May Cry 6. So that is something that would be very interesting as well. And to me, I'm leaning more, especially now after having this discussion, I'm leaning more that Devil May Cry 6 is more likely and to where you explore this particular thing. And something happening in the story to where she would be revealed and there would be more backstory pretty much discovered is something that is very important. And Devil May Cry does this. Whenever they focus on the past, they do focus it in some sort of way, whether it's very subtly or a little bit more in depth. But for the most part, like to focus on a very specific point in time in Virgil's life that obviously ended up to the birth of Nero, would be something that it would be a mystery solved because it was brought up literally in Devil May Cry 5, right? So it was literally up to fans to speculate who this person is, whether they're human or not, and where exactly Virgil was in his life in terms of where this took place. So I think this is quite interesting, if you ask me. So to me, it would make sense to where this would take place right before the events of Devil May Cry 3, because afterwards, by the end of Devil May Cry 3, Nero was pretty much in the demon world, and then we saw him later as Nilo Angelo in Devil May Cry 1, and then after that we didn't see him in Devil May Cry 4. Devil May Cry 2 we don't even talk about, and then obviously Devil May Cry 3 obviously was their third game in the series, but it was a prequel, so we already talked about that. So, and then the next appearance officially would be in Devil May Cry 5. So there's a lot of mystery surrounding the Virgil character and in terms of what happened exactly. And I think that's what the next Devil May Cry game is going to be about. I think it really is going to be about either taking a step closer or just completely solving the mystery of who this person is. And then, if anything, I would say maybe I wouldn't be surprised if Dante knew a little bit more than what was said, even though it seems that he doesn't know anything. But he was very, very certain that once he saw how the Yamato reacted to to Nero absorbing it, he was certain that he was Nero's son. So it's like, maybe Dante knows a very small piece of this puzzle in terms of, who this person is, because in Devil May Cry 5, Virgil basically says, Nero's my son, and Dante basically responds with, yeah, dumbass. So that right there kind of hints to where maybe Dante knows who Virgil's mother is, or maybe has an idea. Not Virgil's mother, Nero's mother, or maybe has an idea and such. So I think this is going to be very interesting. So if it is going to be a sequel, we're definitely going to be seeing flashbacks, and there's going to be a lot of backstory told, which is great. Because like I said, again, in any Devil May Cry game, it kind of there's always something in some way, shape, or form that's told in the backstory. Whether it's more subtle or more in depth. So I think this one is going to be a little bit more in depth. And at the same time, it just makes all the sense in the world, because it's like, well, where do you go forward? And the answer is you go with what was mentioned in your previous game that would get fans very interested, at least for me personally, because Devil May Cry has always been it's always been an interesting story. And like I said before in a previous video, I love the way they structure the game in terms of you got yourself a cutscene, a mission, a cutscene, a mission, a cutscene, a mission. So the way they do it to progress the story is always very good and very rewarding, and I've always loved that in a Devil May Cry game. So I myself am very interested in terms of finding out who this person is and how things came to be, because Virgil is a really cool character, and obviously seems to be a very private person, and also from a personal point of view, you've got Dante, who will use any means necessary to beat his enemies, whether it's a gun or whatever it is, right? Virgil, on the other hand, has a sense of old school honor, to where he just doesn't use guns. The only time he's ever used a gun was when he fired one round with Dante at the end of Devil May Cry 3. With them doing their jackpot thing. So basically, I think that this is the right way to go. And for me personally, I think it's obvious. But we'll see what happens. So what do you guys think? Do you guys think that the next Devil May Cry game is actually going to be a sequel to Devil May Cry 5 that basically touches up a lot on the past? Or do you guys think it's going to be a full-on prequel that happens with the events of Devil May Cry right before the events of Devil May Cry 3, leading into the events of Devil May Cry 3? I'd really like to know. So with that being said, guys, I'm going to end it here, and I can't wait to read your comments down below. So with that being said, I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to watch and or listen. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.